The morning sun glinted off the polished curves of the midnight blue luxury sports car as it rolled silently up the driveway of the glass-walled penthouse complex. The engine purred like a satisfied cat, the kind of refined growl that turned heads and slowed conversations. A delivery driver in a crisp uniform stepped out, removing his sunglasses with a casual flick as if he'd just been entrusted with a sacred task. In his hand, a sleek leather folder contained the car's paperwork, and on top of it, a single gold-embossed envelope. Vanessa stepped out onto the balcony, her silk robe barely tied at the waist, blonde hair tumbling carelessly over her shoulders. She'd been expecting this moment, had rehearsed it in her mind for days, but the reality was even sweeter. Her heels clicked across the marble lobby floor as she descended to greet her new possession. The driver looked her over once, a faint smirk playing at his lips, before glancing at the documents in his hand. "Delivery for Mrs. Emily Carter," he announced clearly, as if reading the words for her benefit. The name echoed in the air like a tiny ripple in an otherwise perfect scene. Vanessa barely registered it. Her mind was locked on the car itself, the glimmering paint, the stitched leather seats, the faint scent of newness that seemed to promise 1,000 more indulgences. "That's right," she said without hesitation, taking the keys as if they had always belonged in her palm. The driver, professional as ever, didn't comment on the fact that the woman before him clearly wasn't the Mrs. Carter on the paperwork. He slid the folder toward her, pointing out where to sign for receipt, but her eyes barely skimmed the words. Somewhere near the top, in bold, was the registered owner's name, Emily Carter. Vanessa's gaze passed over it without a flicker of concern, her mind too busy with a mental image of herself behind the wheel, wind in her hair, every stoplight turning into a stage for her beauty. On the balconies above, neighbors began to notice. One woman watering her plants paused mid-pour, watching the scene with thinly veiled intrigue. Another, phone in hand, quietly took a photo, already imagining the gossip thread in the residents' group chat. They didn't know Vanessa, at least, not yet, but the name they overheard, Mrs. Carter, had weight. Who was she? And why wasn't she here to collect her own car? Vanessa slid into the driver's seat, her robe falling slightly to reveal a flash of tanned skin, and let out a delighted laugh. The engine responded with a low, luxurious growl as she pressed the ignition button. To her, this was the ultimate sign that Daniel, her lover, wasn't just playing games. This was commitment. This was proof that she wasn't just the other woman, she was the woman. The paperwork in the glove box, the name on the title, the legal ownership, none of it mattered to her in that moment. All she cared about was the thrill, the status, and the way the neighbors would whisper as she pulled away. She gave the accelerator a teasing tap, basking in the hum of power. The driver, standing at the curb, watched her disappear into the city streets, shaking his head just slightly, as if he'd seen this kind of story unfold far too many times before. Steam curled lazily from Emily Carter's coffee mug as she sat at the sunlit kitchen island, flipping through the morning news on her tablet. The faint hum of the dishwasher in the background and the smell of freshly baked bread created an atmosphere of calm she had learned to protect. Her mornings were sacred, a slow ritual before the day demanded her attention. She buttered a slice of toast, sprinkled it with a pinch of sea salt, and glanced at the potted herbs on the windowsill swaying gently in the breeze. It was ordinary, safe, predictable. Her phone buzzed with a soft vibration against the marble countertop. She almost ignored it, until she noticed the alert wasn't from a friend or work, but from her bank. A new charge had been processed, a substantial amount, far more than her typical expenses. She frowned, opening the message. Insurance premium payment, luxury sports vehicle coverage. Emily's brow furrowed. She didn't own a luxury sports car. In fact, she hadn't purchased any car in years. She pulled the phone closer, scrolling through the details. The payment was linked to a policy under her name. Her first thought was a clerical error. Her second was less innocent. Pushing her coffee aside, she tapped the dealership's number from the insurance listing. A cheerful receptionist answered, her voice brimming with rehearsed politeness. Emily explained the situation, calmly at first, mentioning the charge and the fact she had no such car. The receptionist hesitated for a fraction of a second before replying. "Mrs. Carter, The vehicle was delivered just this morning, the woman confirmed, scrolling through her system. It's a midnight blue sports coupe, registered to you, address listed in Midtown. Emily straightened in her seat. Midtown was nowhere near their home in the suburbs. I didn't order a car, she said slowly, each word deliberate. And that is not my address. Another pause. The receptionist's tone softened, as though realizing she might be treading into sensitive territory. Well, according to the purchase documents, the title is in your name. Full registration and ownership. Perhaps your husband. Emily ended the call before the thought could settle. She stared at the phone, the quiet of the kitchen suddenly feeling heavier. Her mind replayed the past few months like puzzle pieces tumbling into place. The late-night work calls Daniel took outside, the sudden trips that came with vague explanations, the lingering scent of a floral perfume she didn't own. She had brushed them off, convincing herself she was imagining things, that he was simply under pressure. But this was different. This wasn't a forgotten dinner date or a faint smell of lipstick-stained air. This was paperwork. Legal ownership. Money taken from their joint account. Her coffee sat untouched, cooling fast. She reached for her phone again, not to call Daniel, yet, but to check her email for any other suspicious activity. Beneath her composed exterior, a current of suspicion began to stir, subtle but steady, carrying with it the first ripples of something she knew could no longer be ignored. 6 months earlier, their marriage had felt steady, if not perfect. Daniel was ambitious, always chasing the next promotion, and Emily had learned to live with the demands of his career. But over time, little changes had crept in, subtle at first, easy to dismiss. His business trips began to multiply, sometimes announced only hours before he was due to leave. He'd toss a suit into a garment bag, kiss her on the cheek, and promise to call from the hotel. The calls came, but they grew shorter, more distracted, and sometimes never came at all. At first, Emily told herself this was the cost of success. Daniel's job had always been demanding. This was just a busier season. But the unease started to grow when he began skipping dinners, citing late meetings or urgent deadlines. Even when he was home, his phone was rarely out of reach, its screen lighting up with messages he glanced at and answered with his back to her. He'd take calls in the hallway, his voice low, pacing in a way that made her feel like an intruder in her own home if she drew too close. One evening, a small but unmistakable detail lodged itself in her mind. Daniel had come home later than usual, smiling faintly as if distracted by some private thought. When he bent to hug her, she caught a scent, rich, floral, and undeniably expensive. It wasn't hers. It clung faintly to the lapel of his jacket, weaving itself into the fabric as though it belonged there. She didn't comment then, telling herself it could have come from a colleague, from a restaurant hostess, from anyone. But the doubt planted itself quietly, and once rooted, it grew. Over the months, there were more signs. A hotel receipt tucked hastily into a drawer, miles from where he claimed to be. A champagne charge on the credit card from a night he told her he'd been working late. His sudden interest in networking events that conveniently coincided with weekends away. Still, none of it was proof. Confronting him without evidence would only invite his easy charm and practiced explanations. Both things she had fallen for once, and feared she might fall for again. She told herself she was imagining it, that trust meant letting go of suspicion. But deep down, she began to keep mental notes, quietly filing away each inconsistency, each small shift in behavior. And now, sitting in her kitchen with the knowledge that a luxury sports car, registered in her name, had been delivered to someone else's address, she realized the file in her mind was full. The pieces were falling into place, and for the first time, she wasn't looking for explanations. She was looking for answers. And she knew exactly where to start. Vanessa parked the midnight blue sports car outside her favorite rooftop cafe, the sunlight bouncing off its flawless paint as if it had been polished just for her entrance. She took her time getting out, letting her long legs and designer heels be the first thing anyone saw. The phone was already in her hand, camera flipped to selfie mode. With a tilt of her head and a practiced smile, she posed against the hood, the city skyline rising behind her like a backdrop designed for this moment. New baby, she typed, adding a string of champagne and heart emojis. Then the hashtags followed, hashtag blessed, hashtag dreamcometru, hashtag spoiled. She hit post, the likes rolling in almost instantly. Within minutes, her phone buzzed non-stop. Friends, acquaintances, and even women she barely knew flooded her comments. "Girl, you're living the dream," one wrote. "He must really love you," said another. The praise was intoxicating, feeding the part of Vanessa that thrived on being envied. This wasn't just about the car, it was about being seen as the kind of woman who got the car. She slipped behind the wheel again, lowering her sunglasses as she revved the engine, drawing stares from passers-by. Driving through the city, she noticed heads turning at every stoplight, cameras discreetly snapping photos. She imagined the whispers. Who is she? Who's she with? That was the power she craved. The curiosity, the speculation, the unspoken acknowledgement that she was special. But in the middle of her joyride, a flicker of unease passed over her. As she stopped at a red light, she noticed the name embossed on the small registration card tucked into the glove box, Emily Carter. It was the same name the delivery driver had said aloud that morning. Her lips pressed together for a moment. She knew Daniel was married, he'd never hidden it completely, but she had convinced herself his marriage was little more than a formality, a shell waiting to be shed. The car being in Emily's name, well, maybe it was just easier that way for now. Legal stuff, tax purposes. Nothing to worry about. She dismissed the thought quickly, pressing harder on the accelerator as the light turned green. Greed, after all, was louder than caution. This was her moment, her prize, and she wasn't going to let a name on a piece of paper steal it from her. Somewhere across the city, Emily was already putting plans into motion. Calls made, information gathered, the first threads of a trap quietly tightening. But Vanessa, lost in the thrill of attention and the roar of the engine, had no idea that the luxury in her hands was about to become the very thing that unraveled her. The next morning, Emily drove into the city, her mind set on getting answers. The Department of Motor Vehicles was as dull and uninviting as she remembered, rows of plastic chairs, the faint smell of burnt coffee, and a long line of people waiting under the flickering glow of fluorescent lights. She took a number, sat down, and forced herself to breathe slowly, masking the storm building inside her. When her number was called, she stepped up to the counter, sliding her driver's license across to the clerk. "I need to verify some vehicle registration details," she said, her tone polite but firm. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with glasses perched low on her nose, began typing into the computer. Emily waited, fingers resting lightly on the edge of the counter, every muscle in her body taut. "Yes," the woman said after a moment, eyes scanning the screen. "You are the registered owner of a midnight blue sports coupe. Purchased last week. Fully titled in your name." Emily's stomach tightened, but her expression didn't change. "And that means, what exactly? In terms of responsibility?" "Well," the clerk replied, pushing her glasses up, "as the legal owner, you're responsible for the vehicle in every way. Insurance, registration fees, any parking violations, traffic tickets. If anything happens involving that car, it comes back to you." Emily felt the words settle like cold lead in her chest. Whoever was driving that car wasn't just using her name, they were putting her directly in the line of legal and financial fire. "I'd like to see the registered address," Emily said. The clerk clicked through a few more screens, then read it aloud, a midtown luxury apartment complex. Not her home. Not anywhere she'd ever lived. The name of the street alone was enough to paint a picture. High-rise views, rooftop pools, the kind of place Daniel's so-called business associates might entertain in. "Would you like to update the address?" the clerk asked. "No," Emily said quickly. "Not yet." She thanked the woman, collected the printed confirmation, and walked out into the sharp morning air. She paused on the sidewalk, holding the papers in her hands, scanning the lines again. Her name, her signature, the make and model of the car, the address she had never set foot in. The pieces were no longer floating fragments, they were locking into place. Her suspicion had been a quiet, gnawing thing for months, but now it sharpened into something colder, steadier. This wasn't just about betrayal. This was about exposure. Daniel had made her legally vulnerable while gifting his mistress something that could drag her into a mess she hadn't created. Emily tucked the documents neatly into her bag. The shock had passed. In its place was a clear, deliberate resolve. She wasn't going to confront him yet. No, she was going to be smarter than that. If Daniel thought she was the quiet, trusting wife, he was about to find out just how wrong he was. Daniel arrived at Vanessa's apartment carrying a bottle of vintage champagne and a grin that told her he was in the mood to celebrate. The sports car was parked in the prime spot right outside the building, gleaming under the soft evening lights like a trophy. Vanessa greeted him at the door in a fitted dress that left little to the imagination, looping her arms around his neck before pulling him inside. "Well," she said with a playful glance toward the window, "I think we both know what we're toasting to." Daniel popped the cork with a practiced ease, pouring the champagne into tall flutes. "To you," he said, handing her a glass. "And to finally giving you something worthy of you." They clinked glasses, the bubbles fizzing between them. Vanessa took a sip, then tilted her head, her eyes narrowing in mock suspicion. "You know," she said slowly, "I did notice something interesting. The name on the title." Daniel raised an eyebrow, leaning back on the couch. "Emily's name?" Vanessa hummed, smirking. "Your wife's name. Guess it's cheaper to put it under her and not, oh, I don't know, get caught." She leaned in, teasing but with an edge. "Or is it my safety net? In case you ever change your mind." Daniel chuckled, clearly amused. "Don't be ridiculous. It's just paperwork. I bought it with company funds, don't ask too many questions about that, and it's easier for now to have it in Emily's name. Cleaner. No red flags on my end." Vanessa arched an eyebrow. "Cleaner? Having your wife's name on my car doesn't exactly feel clean." "She'll never know," Daniel said confidently, waving it off. "Emily doesn't even look at the accounts. She's too busy with her garden, her charities, whatever she's doing. This is temporary. I'll transfer ownership in a few months, when things settle." Vanessa studied him for a moment, swirling the champagne in her glass. Part of her wanted to press further, to make sure she wasn't just a secret that could be erased at his convenience. But the other part, the louder part, was still basking in the attention, the gifts, the thrill of being chosen over someone else. She leaned back into his arm, letting the unease fade. "Fine. But when you do transfer it, I want it in gold lettering on the registration. My name, front and center." Daniel grinned, kissing her temple. "You'll get it. Trust me." Neither of them noticed the faint buzz of Vanessa's phone on the coffee table, a notification from a friend who had tagged her in a video of the car. It was already making the rounds online. And somewhere, Emily had already seen it. Emily sat at her desk with the DMV documents spread neatly before her, each line of text a quiet confirmation of what she already knew. The Midtown address, the registration in her name, the insurance details, it was all there in black and white. She read through them one last time, steadying her breathing, then reached for her phone. Her fingers hovered over the keypad for only a second before dialing the non-emergency police line. "City Police Department, how can I help you?" a male voice answered. "Yes," Emily began, her tone measured and deliberate. "I'm calling to report a stolen vehicle. It's registered in my name, but it's currently in the possession of someone I have not given permission to drive or keep it." The officer asked for details. Emily didn't rush. She spoke clearly, precisely. She gave the make, model, and color of the car. She recited the VIN number from the paperwork, then the Midtown address tied to the insurance. When asked how she knew the location, she mentioned she had confirmed it through official records and recent activity she had seen online, choosing her words carefully to ensure they were factual and not speculative. "To be clear," the officer said, "you never gave this person permission to use the vehicle?" "No one in your household did." "That's correct," Emily replied, her voice unwavering. "The car was purchased without my knowledge, registered in my name without my consent, and is currently being driven by someone who is not authorized." She knew the phrasing mattered, This wasn't about marital disputes or messy personal drama. This was a legal matter, plain and simple. The officer's tone shifted, more businesslike now. "All right, Mrs. Carter. We'll open an investigation and mark the vehicle as stolen in our system. We'll also attempt to locate it as soon as possible. If we recover it, you'll be contacted immediately." "Thank you," Emily said. "I appreciate your help." When she ended the call, she placed the phone on the desk and sat back in her chair, letting the silence settle around her. Her heart was steady, her expression composed, but inside there was a quiet, almost dangerous satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge. Not entirely. This was about control, about taking back what had been taken from her without her consent. She gathered the papers, slid them into a folder, and placed it neatly in her desk drawer. The wheels were already in motion now, and she didn't need to lift another finger for the next part to unfold. Somewhere in the city, that car was being enjoyed by someone who believed she had won a prize. Very soon, she would learn otherwise. The hum of conversation at the trendy rooftop cafe was interrupted by the low growl of a luxury engine as the midnight blue sports coupe pulled into a prime parking spot just outside. Vanessa stepped out, all confidence and elegance, tossing her hair over her shoulder as she slung her designer purse into place. She didn't notice the pair of unmarked police cars idling at the far end of the street, their occupants quietly watching. Inside the cafe, Vanessa claimed a table near the edge of the balcony, ordering a glass of sparkling wine and pulling out her phone to scroll through the wave of likes and comments on her latest post. She was too absorbed in her own curated world to notice the officers approaching until their shadows fell across her table. Vanessa blinked up at them, startled. "Excuse me. We're here regarding the vehicle you arrived in," the second officer explained. "It's been reported stolen by the registered owner." Laughter and chatter faded as nearby customers began to watch, phones discreetly, and not so discreetly, lifted to record the unfolding scene. Vanessa's cheeks flushed under the growing attention, but indignation quickly replaced surprise. "That car isn't stolen," she snapped, standing abruptly. "My boyfriend bought it for me." One officer kept his voice calm but firm. "The vehicle is registered to Mrs. Emily Carter, and she has reported it stolen. This is a criminal matter. We'll need you to come with us to answer some questions." Vanessa glanced around, feeling the burn of dozens of eyes on her. A few tables over, a woman angled her phone to get a better shot, murmuring something to her companion. Vanessa's pride kicked in, refusing to let her look small. "I don't care whose name is on the paper," she said loudly, her voice carrying across the rooftop. "It was a gift. This is a mistake." But the officers were unmoved. One gently but firmly took her arm, while the other gathered her purse from the chair. They guided her toward the elevator, their pace measured but unyielding. The murmurs grew into full whispers now, and more phones came up to capture every step. Down on the street, the bright midday sun caught the glossy paint of the sports coupe as an officer opened the driver's door to begin the impound process. The car's GPS tracking had led them straight here. It was a clean, undeniable find. As Vanessa was escorted into the back of the unmarked car, she caught sight of her reflection in the cafe's glass door. Her carefully crafted image, effortless, enviable, untouchable, was gone, replaced by a woman surrounded by flashing cameras, judgmental stares, and the suffocating realization that she was no longer in control of her story. For the officers, it was just another recovery. For Vanessa, it was the beginning of a public unraveling she would never live down. Daniel was in the middle of a meeting when his phone began to buzz insistently in his jacket pocket. He ignored it at first, but when it rang again, and then a third time, he excused himself with an irritated sigh. Stepping into the hallway, he glanced at the screen. "Vanessa." He answered, but instead of her usual playful tone, her voice was tight, almost frantic. "You have to come get me. Now. I'm at the police station." "What? Why?" he demanded, already feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. "They arrested me, Daniel. They said the car is stolen. Your wife reported it." Daniel froze. "That's impossible. Just sit tight. I'll fix this." Within 20 minutes, he was at the precinct, pushing through the front doors with a mixture of worry and irritation. He spotted Vanessa in a small holding area, arms crossed and glaring at anyone who looked her way. Before he could reach her, a uniformed officer intercepted him. "I'm here to clear up a misunderstanding," Daniel began smoothly, reaching for the tone he used in high-stakes negotiations. "That car, yes, it's in my wife's name, but I bought it. There's no theft here." The officer's expression didn't shift. "Sir, the registered owner of the vehicle is Emily Carter. She filed a formal stolen vehicle report. Legally, that makes this a criminal case. Unless Mrs. Carter retracts her statement, there's nothing you can do." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I'm her husband. This is just a personal matter that's gotten out of hand." "That may be true," the officer replied evenly. "But in the eyes of the law, the owner is the owner. If the registered owner says the vehicle was taken without consent, it's theft. Your marital status doesn't give you rights to property in her name." Daniel tried again, framing it as a misunderstanding, hinting at arrangements between spouses, even implying Emily might have filed the report out of spite. None of it mattered. The officer's tone remained neutral, his stance immovable. By the time Daniel was allowed to speak briefly with Vanessa, she was seething. "You said she'd never find out," she hissed, low enough so the officers couldn't hear. He didn't answer right away, because now, standing in the middle of this mess, the truth had begun to crystallize. Emily had found out. And she hadn't confronted him with accusations or drama, she'd gone straight for the jugular, using the system to make her move. As he left the station to start the uphill battle of cleaning this up, a single thought burned in his mind. Emily was no longer just suspicious. She was playing a game he hadn't even realized they'd started, and she was already winning. By the next morning, the rooftop cafe arrest was everywhere. Someone's grainy vertical video had been uploaded to social media within minutes of the incident, and from there it spread like wildfire. The caption read, "When your sugar daddy's wife owns your car, #awkward, and the views skyrocketed. Within hours, news outlets picked it up, some adding their own spin. Corporate ex-sex mistress arrested for driving wife's car. Others went for the jugular with side-by-side photos of Vanessa stepping out of the sports coupe and being guided into the back of a police car. Emily saw the video before breakfast. She watched it once, then again, noting Vanessa's indignant gestures and the precise moment her composure cracked. A few friends texted her almost immediately, some with wide-eyed emojis, others with not-so-subtle praise. "Brilliant move," one wrote. "Remind me never to get on your bad side," another joked. Emily responded to none of them, her phone face down on the table as she stirred her tea. She wasn't interested in gloating, at least, not outwardly. In the corporate world, however, there was no such restraint. By mid-morning, Daniel's assistant had overheard colleagues whispering in the hallway, and an email chain had started circulating with a link to the video and thinly veiled comments about misuse of company resources. In his latest executive meeting, questions were raised about expenses, reputational risk, and the optics of having his personal life splashed across gossip blogs. Daniel tried to maintain his usual smooth demeanor, but the strain was obvious. The more he insisted it was a misunderstanding, the more it sounded like an admission that he'd lost control. Meanwhile, Vanessa was released on bail late that afternoon. She emerged from the precinct wearing oversized sunglasses, her lips pressed into a hard line as cameras snapped and reporters shouted questions. She ignored them all, slipping into a waiting rideshare, but the humiliation clung to her like a second skin. Every notification on her phone was another reminder that her carefully curated online persona had shattered. Where once there had been heart emojis and envious comments, now there were laughing reactions, snake emojis, and strangers dissecting her outfits, her choices, her very existence. Her influencer partnerships began to crumble. A small boutique quietly removed her from their ambassador list. A skincare brand postponed a campaign they'd been planning for months. The car, her pride, her proof, was gone, impounded, and she had nothing to show for it but a pending court date and a reputation in tatters. Back in her quiet home, Emily glanced at the muted TV where yet another panel of talking heads discussed the scandal. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her friends could celebrate on her behalf. Her satisfaction came from knowing she'd acted without theatrics, without rage, just precision. And precision, she thought as she sipped her tea, was what truly made a clean cut. It was close to midnight when Daniel finally slipped his key into the front door. The apartment was dark except for a single lamp in the living room, its golden light spilling across the floor like a spotlight. Emily sat in the armchair by the window, her posture straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wasn't scrolling her phone, wasn't watching TV, she was simply waiting. Daniel froze in the doorway, sensing the deliberate stillness in the air. He set his briefcase down a little too loudly, as if the noise might somehow break the tension. "You're up late," he said, trying for casual, but his voice came out thin. Emily didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached to the coffee table and, with slow precision, slid a neat stack of papers into the light. First, the vehicle title, his handwriting nowhere on it, hers printed in bold as the registered owner. Then the insurance documentation, listing her as the policyholder but addressed to an unfamiliar street. Finally, the official police report stamped with the date and time of the stolen vehicle claim. Her eyes met his, calm but cold. "Why?" she asked, her voice level and quiet. "Was my name on her car?" Daniel's throat tightened. He stepped forward but stopped short, as though an invisible line on the carpet kept him from crossing into her space. "Emily, it's not what you think," he began, but the words felt flimsy even to him. "It was supposed to be temporary. Just a formality until I could." "Until you could what?" she cut in, her tone still unervingly even. "Transfer it to her after laundering the details through my name? Use me as your legal shield so you could hand her a gift I'd be liable for? Which part am I misunderstanding?" Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing a short, frantic line. "It wasn't about you, it wasn't personal. It was complicated. Easier this way." Emily gave a small, humorless laugh. "Not personal. You used my legal identity to protect your mistress, Daniel. That's personal." The weight of her words settled in the room. He looked at her, searching for a trace of the woman who had once met him at the door with a smile, who had forgiven small lies and overlooked late nights. But tonight, her expression was unyielding. There was no anger, no raised voice or accusations flung across the room, only that quiet, cutting disappointment that was far worse. "You've been distant for months," she continued. "I gave you the benefit of the doubt. But now I see what you've been doing while I was trying to keep this marriage afloat." She stood, gathering the papers into a neat pile once more. "This isn't about a car, Daniel. This is about trust, and you totaled that a long time ago." He opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time, Daniel understood, it wasn't just the car he'd lost. It was her. Vanessa sat cross-legged on her bed, the blinds drawn, her phone glowing in the dim light. The humiliation of being handcuffed in front of strangers still burned in her mind, every replay of the viral video twisting the knife deeper. She scrolled through the endless comments, laughing emojis, mocking nicknames, strangers dissecting her clothes, her hair, her voice. She clenched her jaw. They didn't know the real story. She opened her social media app and started typing furiously. Enough of the lies. She uploaded a carousel of private photos, selfies with Daniel at luxury hotels, a shot of them holding champagne flutes in the back of the very car she'd been arrested for driving, blurry images of expensive dinners. Her captions dripped with bitterness. "He loved me. He promised me that car. His wife is just jealous." For a few minutes, the likes and comments trickled in from her small circle of loyal followers. But then the tide shifted. People she didn't know began to flood her posts with disbelief and anger. "So you're bragging about dating a married man?" one wrote. Another, "Entitled much? He used his wife's name to buy you a car and you think you're the victim?" Screenshots of her captions spread to gossip forums, where users dissected her every word, turning her attempt at vindication into fresh entertainment. The more she posted, the worse it became. Someone dug up old clips from her Instagram stories, flaunting expensive gifts and mocking boring wives. Others compared timestamps, pointing out that her proof actually confirmed Emily's version of events. The narrative she'd tried to control slipped from her hands completely. By evening, brands she'd tagged in past sponsored posts quietly removed her from their feeds. A boutique she'd modeled for messaged her to pause future collaborations. Even her so-called friends grew quiet, leaving her unread. Vanessa stared at her phone, watching the notifications slow to a trickle. The internet had turned her into a punchline, and there was no coming back. The fame she'd basked in for months had evaporated in less than 24 hours, leaving her with nothing but a tarnished name, a trail of burned bridges, and the bitter taste of defeat. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of the law office, casting sharp lines across the polished mahogany table. Emily sat at one end, her posture impeccable, a slim folder in front of her. Inside, neatly organized by date and category, was the documentation she had been compiling for weeks. Bank statements highlighting unexplained withdrawals, screenshots of Vanessa's social media posts flaunting gifts, copies of the car title and insurance in her name, and the police report from the stolen vehicle incident. Every page was a piece of the puzzle that painted the full picture of Daniel's betrayal. Her lawyer, a composed woman in a tailored navy suit, flipped through the folder with the precision of someone who had done this countless times. She paused occasionally to underline key points or jot quick notes in the margin. "Emily," she began, looking up with calm assurance. "This is more than enough. Between the misuse of marital funds and the clear evidence of infidelity, you're in a very strong position. The court will favor you, especially with the documentation tying company money to personal indulgences." Emily listened without flinching. There was no need for theatrics. The facts were damning enough. She'd already processed the shock, the hurt, even the humiliation. What remained now was resolve, a cold, measured determination to end the marriage on her own terms. Her lawyer slid a set of papers toward her, the thick cream-colored sheets crisp and final in their purpose. "This is the initial filing for divorce," she explained. "We'll request a division of assets in your favor, and based on the circumstances, I anticipate no significant pushback from the court." Emily picked up the pen, her hand steady. She didn't rush, but she didn't hesitate either. Each stroke of her signature felt like a quiet reclaiming of her life, a symbolic cutting of the ties that had bound her to a man who had so easily discarded her trust. When the last page was signed, she set the pen down, exhaling slowly. Her lawyer gathered the papers with care, promising to file them within the hour. Emily stood, smoothing the front of her blazer, her eyes clear and forward-focused. As she walked out of the office, she didn't look back. The chapter with Daniel was ending, not with screaming matches or public scenes, but with carefully chosen steps that would dismantle his facade piece by piece. The city noise greeted her as she stepped onto the sidewalk, but inside, there was only a calm silence. The kind that comes when you know you've already won. The courtroom was cool and formal, the air thick with quiet anticipation as Daniel took the stand. He was dressed in his best suit, his tie perfectly knotted, his expression carefully schooled into one of composed regret. He spoke about misunderstandings, about miscommunication and misplaced trust, trying to frame himself as a man caught in an unfortunate series of events. But as his words echoed through the room, the weight of the evidence waiting in front of the judge made them sound hollow. Emily sat across from him, her lawyer at her side, her posture unyielding. She didn't need to interrupt or glare. Her case had already been made through the meticulous paper trail she'd provided. The judge flipped through the documents, the car title in Emily's name, the insurance records with another woman's address, proof of company funds being used for personal gifts. With each page turned, Daniel's defense shrank into something pitiful. When it was Emily's turn to speak, her words were calm, deliberate, and free of embellishment. She described the timeline, the evidence, and the breach of trust, never once raising her voice. It wasn't emotion that swayed the courtroom, it was precision. The judge leaned forward, addressing Daniel with a tone that was both stern and final. "The court finds overwhelming evidence of financial misconduct and infidelity. Mrs. Carter will be awarded full ownership of the shared assets, including property, investments, and vehicles. Additionally, The settlement will reflect the damages caused by the misuse of marital funds. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His eyes flickered briefly toward Emily, but she didn't return the glance. Vanessa's name surfaced in the proceedings more than once, always in the context of recklessness, entitlement, and complicity. While she wasn't directly on trial, her involvement had been laid bare for all to hear, cementing her public image as more than just a scandalous rumor. When the gavel finally struck, the sound was sharp and final. Emily stood, collected her things, and walked toward the exit without hesitation. She didn't feel the need for a triumphant smile or a dramatic exit. She had everything she came for: justice, closure, and the freedom to walk away without a single loose end tying her to Daniel Carter ever again. The late afternoon sun shimmered across the coastline, the ocean stretching endlessly beside the winding road. The pearl-white paint of the luxury sports car gleamed like liquid light, catching the glow with every curve it took. The hum of the engine was smooth, steady, a sound of control, of ownership, of freedom. Emily sat behind the wheel, sunglasses shading her eyes, her hair caught in the salt-scented breeze drifting in from the open window. It had been months since the chaos. Months since the courtroom had settled everything in her favor, leaving her with not only the assets she was owed but also the one tangible piece of the betrayal, the car. She had changed it completely. Gone was the midnight blue Daniel had chosen for Vanessa. Now it was hers in every sense. The sleek pearl white with a hint of shimmer was a quiet declaration that she didn't need to flaunt her victories, they simply spoke for themselves. As she drove, the coastline seemed to stretch forever, a ribbon of possibility winding ahead. Emily wasn't in a rush. This wasn't about getting somewhere fast, it was about savoring the fact that every mile she drove was entirely on her terms. The leather interior, once smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't hers, now carried the light scent of her favorite vanilla and cedarwood diffuser. Every detail had been stripped, replaced, reclaimed. Passing a small seaside town, she noticed a billboard. Bold white letters against a deep blue background read, "Women empowering women, stand strong, stand together." A smiling group of women filled the image, different ages, different walks of life, but all united by something unspoken. Emily's lips curved into a smile, not just because the words resonated, but because they were a reminder that her story, though personal, was part of a bigger truth. Her hands rested easily on the wheel as her voice played softly in her mind, words she'd said to herself during sleepless nights and moments of doubt. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge is simply reclaiming what's yours. It wasn't about destruction anymore. It wasn't about punishing Daniel or humiliating Vanessa. That had happened as a byproduct of her actions, but the real victory was this: being whole, unbroken, and entirely in control of her life again. The ocean breeze carried the distant sound of gulls and the rhythmic crash of waves. Emily glanced in the rearview mirror, not to check for traffic, but to acknowledge the symbolism. Her past was literally behind her now, growing smaller with every passing second. She turned the volume up on her playlist, a soulful melody filling the cabin, and let herself enjoy the drive without thinking about where it would end. The road ahead curved toward the horizon, where the sea met the sky in a perfect, limitless line. Emily pressed her foot gently on the accelerator, the car gliding forward effortlessly. The chapter was closed, but her story, her real story, was only just beginning.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.